Welcome to the Healthy Youth Ministry Podcast. HYM exists to encourage, equip, and empower youth pastors and next-gen leaders. Our heart is to develop healthy youth pastors and leaders who are equipped to pioneer and lead healthy youth ministries. To help our community continue to grow, it would mean the world to us if you shared this content with any youth pastors or leaders in your sphere of influence. Or take just 60 seconds to leave a review or rating, which will help increase our reach and impact around the world. Lastly, we would be honored to host you and your team in our national conference on October 14th and 15th in South Dallas at Oaks Church. Again, that's HYMconference.com. Now, it's time to grow. Let's do it. Let's get stronger together.
How do you increase your leadership capacity? That's what we're going to talk about on today's episode of the Healthy Youth Ministry Podcast. Leadership capacity. How do you grow? How do you develop your leadership capacity? When thinking about just the word capacity, I found myself looking up the definition. The definition is the maximum amount that something can contain. So for me, this Celsius can, if you're watching, can only contain a certain amount of ounces. That's the maximum amount that container can hold. When doing a little bit more research, I found myself asking the question, what about leadership capacity? It was defined as simply this: a leader's ability to effectively lead, inspire, and influence others. A leader with high leadership capacity, and this is a definition or a phrase that you might hear around leadership communities. They have a high leadership capacity. They have the ability to navigate challenges, inspire team members, foster collaboration, and achieve organizational goals. So how do we grow in our leadership capacity? I know as next-gen leaders in youth ministry or whatever ministry you're leading, the challenges that we're facing today continue to increase. So as the challenges increase in our culture today, our capacity as leaders must increase. All of us love to quote, and for some of the preachers out there, we love to preach that verse from Ephesians as Paul writes to the church of Ephesus. He says this, "Now all glory to God," and we love to preach this. And man, there's so many rich parts of this passage. All glory to God, yes, who is able, come on somebody, through his power at work within us. He is working within us to do what? To accomplish more. And that's usually the part of the teaching or the message that you have people repeat after you, say more. More than we might ask or think. You see, we like to challenge our leaders, or we even like to inspire students with this verse. But my question to you today is, do you believe that God can do more in and through you? When looking through the pages of Scripture, looking for an example of someone that grew in their leadership capacity, there's so many different examples, but I really want to zoom into one, and that would be the example of Moses. Moses grew in his capacity to lead. But I don't know if Moses really realized that he had that kind of capacity. Yes, from the beginning, we see his story start off in the book of Exodus, and we see that God had set him apart. But I don't know if Moses really knew what for. Later on, we see he has this moment in Exodus chapter 3. He says he's tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro's sheep. And then there's a burning bush moment that's just incredible, that he has this encounter with God. You see, Moses was just fine with tending, but God was calling him to lead. To put it like this, really, Moses thought his capacity was tending, but the Lord knew he had the capacity for leading. Moses was called to more. It says he was tending the flock that day, and you could do some research. Sometimes a flock would be anywhere from 1,000, but if we were to use the parable that Jesus uses of the lost sheep, let's say that there was about 100 sheep there that day as Moses was tending the flock. You see, Moses thought, I'm just good with this 100. I'm good with just tending this flock of sheep, but God was calling him to lead a nation. We later on see in the book of Numbers that there were over 600,000 men. And some historians, they say that the total Israelite population was around 2.4 million. That included women and children. So Moses thought he was just to 10 to 100, but God had him, like the capacity within him, to eventually lead 2.4 million. And I believe that the same is true for you. I believe that there's more in you than you think. But a lot like Moses, we find ourselves arguing and complaining to God on holy ground. I believe that you have the capacity to lead at another level. But this is what I know. To grow, you got to let go. To grow, you got to let go. It's hard to lead into the future when you're holding on to the past. But I believe that God has more in you than you can think or imagine. He has more capacity in you. He has more students for you to lead, more leaders for you to develop. He has more in you, but to grow, you got to let go. To grow in your capacity, there's a few things you're going to have to let go of. To grow in your capacity, first, you're going to have to let go of complacency. I said it earlier, I believe Moses was just fine tending the sheep. He was just living the dream out here tending the sheep. He had a wife and kids and, tending the sheep of his father-in-law. Life was good, but God had more for him. God was calling him to lead a nation. A question to maybe ask yourself, am I complacent in my calling or in my mission? To grow, you got to let go. To grow in your capacity, you must let go of comparison. You see, Moses, even in his conversation with God, says, hey, I'm not really great as a communicator. I'm not great with words. I kind of stutter a little bit. And I wonder, where did he get that from? Why did he think that way? I believe that he heard someone else speak. Think about it. He was raised in Egypt. He heard some other people speak and how eloquent they spoke and how refined they were as communicators. And he thought to himself, wait, you're asking me to go and communicate and be a mouthpiece? No way. Pick someone else. And he found himself comparing. We got to stop comparing. To grow in our capacity, we got to let go of comparison. Man, we got to stop that. I'm thankful for the early years of youth ministry for me. As I started out in youth ministry in 2001, there was no social media. You're talking about, we were 4 years away from Facebook and 5 from YouTube. There wasn't a lot of comparison. I would go home after a great youth service and I'd be thanking God, thank you for those 3 first-time guests. Thank you for those 2 students that said yes to Jesus. God, man, what an opportunity we have to onboard a couple of new leaders. Man, what a privilege it is to do kingdom work. But now, you know what we do? We get home and we find ourselves scrolling. You see me scrolling, comparing what's going on in other leaders, in other ministries. And then we find ourselves, struggling with realizing how God is using us in our capacity. To grow in your capacity, you must let go of comparison. And the next one goes right along with it. To grow in your capacity, you must let go of complaining. Moses was complaining about a lot of stuff. Well, I can't, and if I had, and what do they say if they ask me this? He was complaining, and it sounds like a lot of leaders today. If I had that pastor as my lead pastor, if I had that facility, if I had that budget, if I had that social media following, man, we could really make an impact. To grow in your capacity, you got to let go of complaining. It's time we let go of complaining. Focus on what you do have. Do you have a few leaders? Do you have a few students? Man, I think about, our first youth ministry. We had cinder block walls, 4 or 5 different colors of metal chairs. I didn't even know they made that many different colors of metal chairs. But it was in that space that we focused on what we did have. Man, we did have a group of students. Hey, I did have a sound system. Hey, man, we didn't have social media at the time, but you know what? I got disposable cameras and gave those out to students for us to capture moments and memories. Man, focus on what you do have. I remember another place I was leading, and we had a gym, a cafetorium, and it was like this as multi-purpose of a building that you can imagine. And I did find myself complaining, and what if we did this, and what if we did that? But it wasn't until we focused on what we did have that we really started to see an increase in growth. Man, we have to let go of complaining and comparison and complacency. This next one, skip the story. Now that Exodus 18, Moses is now, he has been growing his capacity. He's led the people out of Egypt, and they have faced multiple obstacles up to this point. But this last one, to growing your capacity, guess what you have to do? You got to let go of control. I love the quote from Craig Groeschel. He says, you can have control or you can have growth, but you can't have both. And when you look into the text in Exodus chapter 18, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, shows up and is bringing his family back. And at the beginning of the chapter, just talking about all God's done. And it's just, look what God has done and how faithful he's been. And then it says the next day, Jethro's just observing Moses, and he's realizing all these people are lined up, and they're all coming to Moses for answers, and they're all waiting in line. And Jethro, after his observation, gives Moses some feedback, and he's like, hey, so Mo, you're doing a lot. He actually says this statement: if you continue to do this, you're going to wear the people out and you're going to wear yourself out. And I believe a lot of youth leaders today, they're wore out, they're tired because of all the control. I know it's hard to hear, but you're the lid to the growth in your youth ministry. And typically it comes down to you wanting control. I'll never forget a moment, my friend Dan Leanne, we're having a conversation, and I said to him, he's a mentor and a friend of my life, and I said this statement to him. I said, hey, I think I'm the lid to our youth ministry. And he says, do you really think you're the lid? And I'm like, oh, well, maybe not now that you're asking the question. He says, you are. And I'm like, no. And that night, a leader came in the room and had her phone, and she said, hey, is it okay if we send this post out? It was a social media post. And I said, yes, you can do it. She walked out, and I kind of had this moment that I was like, I am the lid, because I realized I didn't empower her to just send the post out. And so many of us, it's this portion, it's this point that we really, it's holding us back from our capacity, is our need and desire to be in control. This conversation with Jethro that Moses had, it actually helped elevate him to go to another level. His capacity was increased because he was willing to let go of control. There's a whole other conversation here, and we're going to talk more about this in a later episode, but just feedback. Some of us are one feedback conversation away from growing in our capacity to lead. Man, what's that look like? Are you asking people for feedback? Are you asking the question, what's it like to be on the other side of me? And what are some things that you see that I can't see? What I know is capacity doesn't have an expiration on it. As I've had the opportunity to hang around some great leaders, it's interesting, at every level of leadership, I've seen an increase in feedback. And again, this is something we'll talk more and zoom into at another time, but I believe to growing your capacity, you got to let go of control. But a part of Moses letting go of control was having fresh eyes and someone speak into that. What's that even look like when it comes to your services? What kind of feedback are you, what's that look like? Are you asking questions? What kind of feedback are you getting and questions you're asking? I do a simple principle, a simple kind of feedback forum is this, is I believe, like two wings of a plane, you need stats and stories. So what stats represent your Wednesday night? But what stories? What are the God stories? What are the stories there? And then also you need to kind of check the systems in your ministry. So what if every week you were getting feedback by just asking some questions? What are the stats? What are the stories? And what systems do we need to check to become more effective as a ministry? That's just a quick tool that I gave you, but we're going to expand on that in a later podcast. To grow, you got to let go. So some of you might be like, all right, I let go of a lot of stuff. Now, what do I need to be holding on to? Great question. I'm going to give you a few things. What do you need to hold on to? To grow your capacity, you need to be holding on to your calling. Moses had to keep holding on to that moment he had at the burning bush. You need to keep holding on to those God moments, those holy ground moments. Your calling is going to get you through so many different Red Sea and obstacle moments. To growing your capacity, hold on to your calling. Secondly, to growing your capacity, hold on to being consistent. Another way to say it is keep holding on to keep holding on. Moses is a great example of long obedience in the same direction. Keep going. A verse we say it all the time, almost every podcast, every meeting we have with Healthy Youth Ministry. Galatians 6:9, let's not get tired in doing good. At the right time, you'll reap a harvest if you don't give up. Don't give up. Keep holding on to that calling. Keep being consistent. It's wild. There's a study that was done over the last few years. Over 20,000 pastors have quit. Over 4,000 churches have closed. But not you. Not on your watch. Not now. Keep being faithful, and God will keep, providing that fruit. Keep climbing that mountain again and again. Get in those holy ground moments, because you have more in you than you think. To grow, you got to let go. So my prayer today is that you would increase, Lord, increase my capacity for more. Let's do it. Let's keep growing together, because you have more capacity in you. So don't settle for less. And remember, we're stronger together. So refuse to do life alone.
Thank you for listening to the Healthy Youth Ministry podcast. And thank you for investing in your leadership, because the next generation needs you. And we believe healthy youth pastors and leaders are the number one catalyst for seeing healthy youth ministries. Again, make sure to check out HYMconference.com for more information about our national conference on October 14th and 15th. And our final prayer and encouragement to you is this: Galatians 6:9. So let us not grow tired in doing what is good, for at the right time we will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. And with that, we will see you next month for another episode of the Healthy Youth Ministry podcast.